Hey guys, BuildZoid here, and today we're going to be taking a look at another DDR4 overclock with Ryzen, and today we're taking a look at a memory chip that I've not featured on the channel before. It's Nanya 8GB B-Die. This stuff can basically be described as like knockoff Samsung 8GB B-Die. In terms of how, like, what kind of timings it does. It's very different in terms of actual behavior, but performance-wise, it's kind of similar to B-Die, which is pretty neat, especially since it can be found on, like, relatively cheap memory kits. The only issue with it is that it's really difficult to find. There's, like, so with Samsung B-Die, you have, like, hard B-Die bins, like 3200 CL14 or 3600 CL14 or like 4000 16 16 16 or 3600 16 16 16. So there are like dedicated Samsung B-Die bins that, you know, if you buy it, it's always Samsung B-Die because it is literally impossible for other memory chips to do those kinds of timings. This stuff, on the other hand, well, Corsair, like the kit I have here is a 3000 1517 kit, right? So that's like everything does that. You can also find this stuff in like 3600 1819, which is a mix of Micron and Samsung B-Die if you're buying it from Corsair as well. So like, you know, there's like a whole bunch of different memory chips that you can end up getting with that. And so this stuff is really annoying to find because the only way to reliably get it here in the UK is going to eBay and hoping that the seller shows you the version number of the memory kit that they're selling. And if you see version 8.31, you get Nanya. If you get any other version, it's not Nanya 8GB B-Die. So that's why it's taken me so long to actually feature this memory chip, because like performance-wise, it's great. It's a really cool memory chip. It's just really hard to get. So that's kind of annoying. And until recently, I just didn't have any. Even though it's been around for ages, it's just, yeah, I've not managed to get any until very recently. So yeah, and this is a 3000 CL15 rated kit. Right now it's running 3800 CL15. We'll get into the setting. Like we're going to take a look at the stress test, then we're going to run some performance benchmarks. I guess I should show you the, like, you can see the system specs, right? It is single rank because only 2x8. Like, I'd like to test it in 4x8, but I don't have I don't have enough Nanya 8GB B-Die sticks to do a 4x8 test. I don't think, like, the main reason I'd want to test that is to see how much stress it puts on the memory controller, because initially this stuff seems to be relatively easy to run. Like, I actually was able to boot it all the way up to like 4733 without too much difficulty. But yeah, anyway, so here's the setup. I've got an air cooler on the 5950X. That's a Sigmatech Thor's hammer. It's very old. It can actually deal with like a 200 watt heat load from the 5950X, to my great surprise. This is a very old air cooler that I got with a random X58 motherboard at one point in time. And recently I've sort of thought to myself, well, what if I just strapped it to the 5950X? Turns out it actually does a decent job, and it does, like, it's compatible with the default clip mechanism for AMD CPU coolers, so it's actually really convenient. So that's why I'm using it instead of an AIO here. Obviously, an AIO would perform better in terms of cooling, and then like custom loops would be even better, but the priority here is the memory testing. And the motherboard is a B550 Vision D-P because this is basically my favorite AM4 motherboard. So yeah, that's also why it's kind of orange. Also, there's a bunch of mods on this board, but those mods are currently not doing anything. They're for other things. So anyway, let's take a look at the stress test results. So here's the stress tests. LinPack, 33 loops. So yeah, and this is running with PBO. So the PBO settings are just 333 watts power limit with a 222 amp current limit, because it's LinPack. Like, there are other, if you're tuning your PBO for like Cinebench or something, then the settings I'm using here are not actually going to get you peak performance in Cinebench, because PBO is stupid. And you can't just max out the power limits, because if you just max out the power limits, it like slows down in lighter workloads while speeding up in the really, really heavy stuff. So yeah, for peak performance in LinPack, you'd need to use like slightly different PBO settings from peak performance in like Cinebench or something. Anyway, I'm using LinPack for stress testing, so I have the PBO settings set like really high. Yeah, 222 amps EDC. Yeah, 222 amps EDC. And the CPU ended up maxing out at like 90 degrees Celsius, actually a little over 90 degrees Celsius, but considering it's on an air cooler, that's like really not designed for this platform whatsoever. That's actually surprisingly okay. Also, PBO won't damage the CPU. Like, it won't let it get so hot that it would actually be dangerous to the health of the chip. So anyway, that's just fine. Also, it's worth noting, like, this is a board that I ran on LN2, and so it has plastidip all over the VRM as just insulation. The VRM never went over 70 degrees Celsius, which is quite impressive, considering that there's literally a layer of rubber between the VRM components and the thermal pad of the VRM heatsink. So yeah, like this is actually something I've always like the thing, like especially considering that this board's VRM is not like the most powerful B550 motherboard VRM. Like 70 degrees, considering really suboptimal, like thermal transfer to the VRM heatsink is actually not bad. Anyway, yeah, so 33 loops of Linpack with just the CPU pulling like 200 watts, getting 580 gigaflops per second, which is not the highest you can do on a 59. Well, the issue is that PBO just doesn't boost that hard in Linpack. So if I tune this manually on water cooling, we could probably be looking at we'd be looking at over 600 gigaflops per second, but air cooler. So PBO, like this was the lazy way of getting the CPU to run somewhat quickly. If I manually tune this on water cooling, I think we might be able to get into like the 600. Actually, I think I even did 620 on the air cooler. The issue is that it would overheat very quickly. So, yeah, it wouldn't be viable to run that for extended periods of time. But, yeah, so unfortunately, this isn't really a useful performance test considering the air cooling, but as a stress test, it still does a good job. Mem test, well, I also ran HCI Mem Test Pro, 32 threads, and that's 400%, over 400% coverage on every thread, no errors. I also ran Test Mem 5, the Extreme One Anta 777 preset, and so yeah, everything runs. Like, it passes all the stress tests that I would want it to pass. And now let's go take a look at the settings in the actual BIOS. So here's I'm going to quickly take a screenshot in case something goes wrong with this video. But yeah, so Linpack runs, MemTest runs, Test Mem 5 runs, CPU's on PBO because air coolers are, like, I could have manually tuned it, but I didn't feel like putting that much time into it. Anyway, so let's go take a look at the actual memory settings in the BIOS. And the cool thing is this stuff is really quite easy to work with. It just runs really hot, and it is temperature sensitive. So unfortunately, these sticks don't have built-in temperature sensors as far as I can tell. But using a contactless thermometer, they end up at like 60 degrees Celsius while running MemTest or Test Mem 5, which is kind of insane considering that we're at what I would consider rather low voltage of just 1.46 volts on the memory. And the thing is, if you keep raising the voltage, these DIMMs actually stop scaling because they just get really hot, and that causes stability issues. So they don't really scale past, like, I think with more cooling, maybe you could get them to run properly at like 1.5, 1.55, but like, they keep improving in terms of bootable settings up to like 1.6, but in terms of stability, it just starts to go very bad very quickly if you keep pushing the voltage. So yeah, we're at 1.46 on the voltage. DRAM termination is on auto right now. There's just no reason to like, when I was testing max frequency, it actually helped to lower the termination, but for like 3800 CL15, it really doesn't matter. I have the VDD 1.8 volt rail slightly raised. This can help with FCLK stability. SOC's at 1.1 volts, which is a perfectly good SOC voltage to use. This BIOS version is actually pretty good about like auto, VDDG, and all of that voltage. So I think if we go, yeah, so all of this stuff is just left on auto, which it's like it passes stress test. Oh, we're on F15A, not F15G. I forgot what BIOS version it's on. Anyway, yeah, so really easy to set up, right? Just 1.46 volts. Don't even need to tweak termination at 3800. And then for the actual timings, we're looking at 15, 18, 8, 14. So RTP goes pretty low. TRAS is not relevant in this scenario because TRC is at 48. It doesn't go lower. So yeah, RTP is at 14. So like effective TRAS right now is like 34. But yeah, that like the thing is like if I do this, it has no impact on stability on performance compared to this. So that's why I don't get why Ryzen CPUs even bother having a TRAS register, because it doesn't do anything. Like, assuming you set your TRC, this doesn't do anything. Anyway, TWR is at 10. It doesn't go any lower. TCWL is at 14. It might go lower, but it doesn't really help performance much on Ryzen, so I've left it that at 14. TRRDs are at 4.4. It doesn't get better than that. WTRs at 3.7, which is surprisingly low. Like, I have a lot of B-die which will not do 3.7. This does, so that's kind of neat. 2.6 doesn't work. 2.7 doesn't work. 3.6 also doesn't work. Actually, wait. Yeah, no, it doesn't work. TRFC at 280. I didn't try lower TRFC values, but it almost certainly wouldn't go below 240, and the difference between like 280 and 240 is rather minor, so it doesn't matter. RTP at 6. This doesn't go any lower. I'm like, if you tried to lower it any further, it stops being stable. TFAW 16, it doesn't get better than that. And then for the tertiaries, those are on auto because this is a single rank memory setup, and the TRDWR and well, TRDWR is set correctly on auto. It's at 10.9, and that's just fine. SCLs are at 2 because yeah, that's normal. I left TCK. I think the TCKE4 is not a limitation of the memory chips. I just forgot that, like, because on Intel CPUs the TCKE register only goes to 4. On Ryzen CPUs, it goes below 4, but I forgot about that, and I punched in 4. So, yeah. Anyway, this being a 6-layer daisy chain gigabyte board on like the good new daisy chain, because if you like, there's some very early, like the original X570 gigabyte boards, the first release X570 gigabyte boards have a daisy chain topology that's a horrible mess. Especially on newer BIOSes, because like the BIOSes have been, like, I think on early BIOSes it wasn't that bad, but on later BIOSes the topology on those boards just doesn't work properly anymore. On the newer gigabyte boards with the like really good 6-layer daisy chain, which is this, like the B550 Vision D-P, the B550 Aorus Master, Revision 1.1 X570 boards, you just use 40 ohm proc ODT. I have not run into a scenario where I needed to use any other processor on-die termination value. Like, this topology really seems to be dialed in for 40 ohm termination, and that's it. So, yeah, it doesn't really... Like, I've tried other values. A lot of the time it either does nothing for stability or it just gets worse. 40 is sort of seems to just be ideal on these boards. Command rate 1T, and it's real 1T because we have gear down mode disabled. And then I didn't need to really set anything else other than command drive strength, which I'm not even sure is necessary. But if you're trying to push command rate 1T without gear down mode, in a lot of scenarios, it helps to drop the command drive strength down to 20 ohms. So yeah, that's what's going on there. I didn't test if it doesn't work with 24. It works with 20. I don't care if it would work with 24. So yeah, and then data bus configuration is just all auto. The board does a perfectly good job of setting that itself. This 5950X unfortunately doesn't do higher FCLK than 1900. Like, I've tried many times to push this 5950X to higher FCLKs. It just keeps erroring. There's nothing I can do about it. I also don't have any other 5000 series CPUs, so this is kind of the limit of what this CPU is able to push these memory sticks to. At least in 1-to-1 mode. If I was in 2-to-1 mode, then Uh, we could probably stabilize something at like 4600, but I'm not entirely sure why I'd want to do that. Anyway, so that's it really. Yeah, Nanya 8 gigabit B die is very, very, like, it's good, right? Like, it does, like, really the only thing you could complain about is the TRC-DRD and the TRC. Those are like the only two timings where it doesn't go super ridiculously low. Like if we were comparing it to Samsung 8 gigabit B die, like good Samsung 8 gigabit B die, there you'd be expecting a TRC of like under 40 potentially, and a TRC DRD of like 16, 15, 14, 13 sometimes. Um, and so yeah, this isn't quite as strong as Samsung 8 gigabit B die when it comes to TRC DRD and TRC, but everything else, it's actually like it's basically matching it, right? TRFC is basically typical B die stuff. WTRs are actually better than most B die in my experience. RTP is really good. Actually, RTP6 works on most B die as well, so that like Samsung 8 gigabit B die. So yeah, SCLs too, which is kind of normal, at least on gigabyte boards. I like, yeah, because I've seen some like, well, no. The thing is, I think I've done SCL2 on basically every motherboard I own. So yeah, I'm not sure. No, no. The thing is, I'm thinking back to the reacting to RAM timings video I did recently because there was a few comments from people where they're like, I can't actually lower the SCLs below 3. And it's like, to me, that's super weird because I've literally not, like, one of the first things I do with any memory on any of my AM4 motherboards is just punch in 2.2 for the SCLs. It might be because it's the first thing I do, and then I tune everything else. But yeah. Anyway, so yeah, this stuff's really easy to work with, in my opinion. Like, it didn't really take, like, the one complaint I have for it is it does seem to run really, really hot. So I actually want to do some testing to measure its power consumption because it seems to pull, like, considering how hot it runs, I have a sneaking suspicion that this stuff just pulls like way more power than other DDR4 memory chips. But unfortunately, I don't have this motherboard set up to test, like, to measure that. I have a different motherboard that I can measure that on, but that motherboard's not as good at memory overclocking. So that'll be potentially future content, maybe. I'm not sure. Um, but yeah, like, really cool memory chip. It's just a massive shame that it's ridiculously difficult to find. Anyway, let's run some benchmarks on this. So we're just going to go with IDA because unfortunately, like, all of the better memory benchmarks require like manual CPU settings. So anyway, let's see what this does. I've not run IDA on this yet, so I actually don't know what to expect. Um, Also, this OS is a mess. Like, 3D Mark TimeSpy on this Windows install is broken for some reason. I've been meaning to get rid of this OS for a while, but it just, I keep using it, and it keeps getting more and more broken. Because it doesn't affect stability testing. There's just like a bunch of weirdness with like performance, especially. So don't tell me IDA's broken too. Oh no, it isn't. There's also one other issue. I actually don't know how single rank B die is supposed to score, like Samsung single rank B die. So like we don't have comparison points, which is annoying. Latency's not bad. Which is what you'd expect. There's actually a very slight latency advantage for single rank setups. It doesn't actually translate into real world performance because dual rank just demolishes single rank, but yeah, so latency is not bad. Also, if you have a single CCD CPU, your latency is better than if you have a dual CCD CPU, so unfortunately, pretty much all memory benchmarks are extremely situational. But we will run Geekbench 3. Unfortunately, Geekbench 3 is not going to be particularly impressive either because Geekbench 3 scales primarily with memory clock rather than really anything else, and so yeah. Like I guess we could hit this with PyPrime, but I again don't have comparison points. So I'm going to guess that we're going to get a score somewhere in like the 9,000s range, which it's not bad. Like somewhere around a 9,000 points. Maybe higher, but I think it's not clocked high enough. Like Geekbench actually will score better at like 4,800 than it does at 3,800. Even with the latency penalty of 2 to 1. Yeah, so over 9,000 points, which we're on a single rank setup. A dual rank setup would probably be hitting close to 10,000. So yeah, like not a bad result for like single rank. For a single rank memory chip. I just don't have comparison points, which I'm kind of annoyed by. Like I really should have run some benchmarks on like a single rank Samsung V-die setup to compare against. But I mean, if you just look at the timings alone, it's pretty obvious that this is good. The one problem here is just it's single rank, so yeah, it's just not going to score that high. But like, you know, B-die basically only does slightly better TRCD, slightly better TCL, better TRC, and that's it. Everything else is basically B-die timings. So yeah, Nanya 8 gigabit B-die. Like I said at the earlier in the video, it's basically knockoff Samsung B-die. It's just a real shame that like you can't find it very easily. Like you really have to search for this stuff to get it, which I really like. I think that's a massive shame because it's a really fun memory chip. Mostly because it's basically Samsung B-die, but not really. And yeah, so also I'm gonna fix the typo in the there. So this was on F15A. I also like if you're wondering what's with the note about F12G over here, that's because F12G actually just outclocks the more recent AGSAs in my experience. So potentially what I want to do is actually test this board back on the F12, like test this memory on the F12G BIOS and see if I can't run it at like 4,800. Because on the later BIOSes, really high memory clocks seem to be kind of unstable compared to F12G. Where like F12G is really good at like both 3,800, like in 1-to-1 mode and 2-to-1 mode, F12G is great. Whereas the newer BIOSes only really seem to work well in 1-to-1 mode. So, yeah, but that like the newer like that's not really a problem for daily settings because for daily settings you're always going to be in 1-to-1 mode. But if you're benching something like Geekbench, then you want to be in 2-to-1 because Geekbench is a sucker for memory bandwidth. But yeah. So hopefully this is somewhat interesting. Unfortunately, it's not a very practical video because good luck finding Nanya 8 gigabit B-die. Like I said, the easiest way to get it is eBay, which is not a good way of sourcing memory chips, especially because occasionally you get sent memory sticks with really garbage packaging and then the memory sticks show up dead. But yeah, like It's a cool memory chip. I'll probably test it out on Intel. The reason I started with testing on Ryzen is because the Ryzen memory controller is a lot less, it complains less about things. Like, Intel memory controllers are very touchy about memory chips that they're not, like, basically there's a lot of manual optimization that goes into getting certain memory chips working on Intel motherboards. Whereas with Ryzen, most stuff seems to work really well these days. I mean, original Ryzen memory controllers like 1000 series, 2000 series, those were terrible. But since like 3000 series, you can take basically any memory chip and it'll probably run pretty well. Yeah, like there are still some compatibility differences compared to Intel. Like Hynix DJR really runs way better on Intel CPUs than it does on Ryzen CPUs. But yeah, I wanted to start with this because I don't know what'll happen if I take this stuff and try to run it on Z690. Like I honestly, like, I've run into situations where like you take a memory stick that does like great settings on Ryzen and then you put it in an Intel motherboard and it gets stuck at 3600, which is just Intel memory controllers. So yeah, anyway, that's it for the video. So thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. If you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon. There's a link to that down in the description below. There's also the AHOC Teespring store where you can pick up shirts, hoodies, posters, usual YouTuber merch. And I also have a Bandcamp, and there's a link to that down in the description below as well. So yeah, that's it for the video. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.